The old stagecoach bounced and shook as it rolled through the muddy trail. Inside, a young woman named Clara held tight to her small bag. Her heart was beating fast. She had been traveling for 3 long days, and now she was almost there. Almost at her new home. Almost to meet the man who would be her husband. Clara looked out the small window. Rain was falling hard. The sky was dark gray and everything looked wet and cold. This was not what she had expected. The letters from her future husband, James, had told her about green fields and sunny days. But all she could see was mud and storm clouds. The stagecoach driver called out from the front. "Last stop. Pine Ridge!" Clara's stomach felt like it had butterflies. She had left everything behind in Ohio. Her sister had cried when she left. Her mother had worried. But Clara needed to do this. There was nothing left for her back home. Her father had died 2 years ago and money was tight. When she saw the newspaper ad from a rancher looking for a wife, she had written a letter. James had written back. They had shared letters for 6 months. He seemed kind in his writing. He promised her a good life. But now, sitting in this bouncing stagecoach, Clara wondered if she had made a big mistake. The coach stopped with a jerk. Clara could hear voices outside. Men talking. Horses making noise. The rain was still coming down hard. She took a deep breath and waited. The door opened. A tall man stood there. He had a hat that was wet from the rain. His coat was brown and looked old but strong. His face was serious but not mean. His eyes were blue like the sky on a clear day. This had to be James. "Miss Clara?" he asked. His voice was deep but quiet. "Yes, that's me," she said. Her voice was smaller than she wanted it to be. He reached out his hand to help her down from the coach. His hands were big and rough, like someone who worked hard every day. "I'm James. Welcome to Pine Ridge." Clara stepped down into the mud. Her nice traveling dress, the one she had saved money for, was getting wet right away. She looked around. Pine Ridge was not a big town. There were maybe 10 buildings. A store, a church, a place that looked like a saloon. That was about it. James was getting her trunk from the back of the coach. It was heavy, but he lifted it like it was nothing. "We should get going," he said. "Storm's getting worse." He led her to a wagon. It was simple and strong, just like everything else she had seen so far. The horse was brown and looked tired. James put her trunk in the back of the wagon, then helped her up to the seat. Clara had imagined this moment many times during her long trip. She had thought they would talk. Maybe he would tell her how pretty she looked. Maybe they would laugh together. Instead, James just got up on the wagon and picked up the reins. "How far is your ranch?" Clara asked as they started moving. "About an hour," James said. He was looking straight ahead at the muddy road. Clara waited for him to say more. But he didn't. She tried again. "The town seems nice." "It's small," James said, that was all. Clara felt her heart sink a little. Maybe he was just shy. Maybe he was nervous too. She had been writing to him for months, but now they were strangers again. The wagon rolled through the rain. Clara pulled her coat tighter around her. She was cold and wet and starting to feel scared. What if James didn't like her? What if she didn't like him? What if this whole thing was a terrible mistake? She looked at James from the corner of her eye. He was focused on driving the wagon. His jaw was set like he was thinking hard about something. His clothes were simple but clean. His boots were muddy but looked well made. He was not ugly, that was good, but he was so quiet. "Tell me about your ranch," Clara said, trying to keep the conversation going. "It's small. Got some cattle, some chickens, good water." James's answers were short, like he was counting words and didn't want to use too many. Clara had grown up in a family that talked a lot. Her father had told stories every night at dinner. Her mother had sung while she cooked. Her sister had chattered about everything and nothing. This silence felt strange and uncomfortable. The rain kept falling. The wagon wheels made splashing sounds as they rolled through the mud. Clara could see mountains in the distance, but they looked gray and unfriendly in the storm. Everything was so different from Ohio. Back home, there were trees everywhere and neighbors close by. Here she could see for miles and there was almost nothing, just grass and sky and emptiness. After what felt like forever, James pointed ahead. "There it is." Clara looked where he was pointing. She could see a small house in the distance. As they got closer, she could see it better. It was made of wood and looked solid, but it was much smaller than she had expected. There was a barn nearby, and she could see some cows standing under a shelter trying to stay dry. The house had one main room that she could see and maybe a bedroom. There was a small porch, but no fancy decorations. No flower garden like her mother had back home. Just a simple, practical house sitting alone on the empty land. James stopped the wagon near the porch. "This is it," he said. Clara looked at the house. This was going to be her home. This was where she would live for the rest of her life. It was so small, so plain, so different from what she had imagined. But she had come this far. There was no going back now. James jumped down from the wagon and came around to help her. The rain was still falling and they were both getting soaked. He carried her trunk to the porch, then opened the door. "Go on in," he said. "Get out of the rain." Clara walked into her new home. It was dark inside, but she could see well enough. There was a main room with a table, 2 chairs, and a fireplace. The kitchen was just a corner with a stove and some shelves. She could see a door that probably led to the bedroom. Everything was clean but very simple. There were no curtains on the windows. No pictures on the walls. No flowers or pretty things. It looked like a place where a man lived alone and only cared about the basics. James came in behind her, shaking the rain off his coat. "It's not much," he said. "But it's warm and dry." Clara nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak right then. She was tired from the long trip. She was wet and cold. She was scared about what came next. And she was starting to realize that the life she had imagined from his letters was very different from the reality standing in front of her. "You hungry?" James asked. "A little," Clara said. James went to the stove and started building up the fire. "Got some stew from yesterday. Should still be good." While he worked on the food, Clara looked around more carefully. The furniture was handmade but well built. Everything had its place. The floor was swept clean. James might be quiet, but he kept a neat house. She went to the window and looked out at the rain. The land stretched out forever in all directions. Back in Ohio, she had been surrounded by people and noise and activity. Here there was just silence and space and the sound of rain on the roof. "Food's ready," James said. They sat at the small table and ate the stew. It was good, simple, and filling. James had made biscuits too, and they were better than Clara had expected. Maybe he was a better cook than talker. "Thank you," Clara said when she finished eating. "That was very good," James nodded. "You look tired." Clara was exhausted. The long trip, the stress, the rain, meeting James, seeing her new home. Everything was catching up with her. "The bedroom is yours," James said. "I'll sleep out here for now." Clara felt relieved. She had been worried about that part. "Thank you." James showed her to the bedroom. It was small but clean. There was a bed, a dresser, and a chair. A small window looked out toward the barn. Her trunk was already there. "I'll let you get settled," James said, and he closed the door behind him. Clara sat on the bed and looked around the room. This was her new life. Tomorrow she would wake up as James's wife. They would have a simple ceremony with the preacher in town. Then they would come back here to this small house on this empty land and try to build a life together. She opened her trunk and started taking out her things. Her extra dress. Her few books. The quilt her mother had made for her. A picture of her family. As she put these familiar things around the room, it started to feel a little more like home. Outside, the rain was still falling. She could hear James moving around in the main room, probably getting ready for bed. Soon the house was quiet except for the rain on the roof and the wind in the grass. Clara changed into her nightgown and got into bed. The mattress was not soft, but it was comfortable enough. She lay there thinking about everything that had happened. James was not what she had expected. He was quieter, more serious, but he had not been unkind. He had shared his food and given her his bedroom. Maybe things would get better once they got to know each other. She thought about the long journey that had brought her here. 3 days on trains and stagecoaches, leaving behind everything familiar. All because she had answered an ad in a newspaper. All because she had believed that somewhere out there was a better life waiting for her. Maybe she had been wrong. Maybe this was not the adventure she had dreamed of. But it was too late to change her mind now. Tomorrow she would marry James. This little house would become her home. This quiet man would become her husband. As she drifted off to sleep, Clara could still hear the rain falling on the roof. It sounded lonely, like the wind singing a sad song about travelers far from home. But underneath that sound she could hear something else. The solid, steady sound of a house built to last. A house that would keep her safe from the... Clara woke up to the sound of boots on wood. Heavy, careful steps moving around the house. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she remembered Montana, the ranch, James. She was married now. The wedding had been simple. Just her, James, and the preacher in the little church in town. James had worn his best shirt and pants. Clara had worn her blue dress, the nicest one she owned. There had been no flowers, no music, no party afterward. Just a few words from the preacher, and then they were husband and wife. That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of trying to figure out how to live with a man who barely spoke. Clara got dressed and went to the main room. James was gone already. She could see him through the window walking toward the barn. He always got up before sunrise to take care of the animals. By the time she woke up, he was already working. There was coffee on the stove, still warm. James always made coffee before he went out. He never said good morning, but he always left coffee for her. Clara poured herself a cup and sat at the table. The house was quiet. So quiet she could hear the clock ticking on the shelf. Back in Ohio, mornings had been full of noise. Her mother making breakfast, her sister getting ready for school, neighbors calling to each other across the yard. Here, there was just silence and the sound of wind outside. Clara looked around the room. She had tried to make it feel more like home. She had put her mother's quilt on the back of a chair. She had set her books on a shelf. She had even picked some wildflowers and put them in a jar on the table, but the house still felt empty somehow. She finished her coffee and started making breakfast. Eggs from the chickens, bacon from the pig they had butchered last month, biscuits if she had time. James would come in when he smelled the food cooking. He always did. While she cooked, Clara thought about the letters James had written to her back in Ohio. In those letters, he had seemed different. He had told her about the sunsets over the mountains. He had described the way the grass moved in the wind like waves on the ocean. He had written about wanting someone to share his life with. But the man who came in for breakfast every morning was not the same as the man who had written those letters. This James barely looked at her when he ate. He said thank you when she put food in front of him, and good when she asked if he liked it. That was about all. Clara had tried to start conversations. She had asked about the cattle, about the weather, about the neighbors. James answered with as few words as possible. Fine. Maybe rain later. Don't see them much. She had tried telling him about her life back in Ohio, about her family, about the town where she grew up, about the books she liked to read. James listened, but he never asked questions. He never shared stories of his own. The door opened and James came in. His boots were muddy, so he stopped on the rug by the door to clean them. He hung his hat on the hook and washed his hands in the basin. Morning, Clara said like she did every day. Morning, James said back. Clara put his breakfast on the table. Eggs, bacon, biscuits with butter and jam. James ate everything she put in front of him, but he never said if he liked it or wanted something different. How are the cattle today? Clara asked. Good, James said. Any problems with the fence? Fixed the section by the creek. Clara waited to see if he would say more about it. Maybe tell her what had been wrong with it, or how he had fixed it. But James just kept eating. After breakfast, James would go back outside. He would check on the animals, fix things that needed fixing, move cattle from one pasture to another. He worked hard from sunrise to sunset. Clara could see him out the window sometimes, always busy, always focused. Clara spent her days trying to figure out what a ranch wife was supposed to do. She cooked and cleaned and did laundry. She took care of the vegetable garden behind the house. She fed the chickens and gathered eggs. She learned to milk the cow, though it took her a while to get the hang of it. But there were long hours when there was nothing that needed doing right away. Times when she would sit by the window and look out at the empty land and wonder what she had gotten herself into. She wrote letters to her sister back in Ohio, but it was hard to know what to say. She couldn't write about how lonely she felt. She couldn't write about how different James was from his letters. So she wrote about the weather and the animals and how big the sky was, safe things that wouldn't worry anyone back home. In the evenings after dinner, James would sometimes sit on the porch. Clara would join him, hoping they might talk while they watched the sunset. But James would just sit quietly, smoking his pipe and looking out at the land. Clara tried reading her books, but it was hard to concentrate when she felt so unsettled. She tried sewing, but her hands would shake a little when the silence got too heavy. One evening, after they had been married for almost a month, Clara decided to try something different, James, she said as they sat on the porch. What do you think about in the evenings when we sit out here? James was quiet for so long that Clara thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he said, the land. The animals. What needs doing tomorrow? Do you ever think about other things? About people you used to know? About places you've been? Another long pause. Sometimes. Will you tell me about them? James looked at her then. Really looked at her for maybe the first time since she had arrived. His blue eyes were serious but not unfriendly. Not much to tell, he said finally. I've lived here for 8 years. Before that, I worked on other ranches. Before that, my family had a farm in Kansas. Parents died when I was young. Sister moved to California. Haven't heard from her in years. It was the longest speech James had given since Clara arrived. She waited, hoping he would say more. What about you? He asked, surprising her. What do you mean? What do you think about in the evenings? Clara had not expected him to ask her a question. I think about my family back home. I wonder if my sister is happy. I think about my mother and whether she's managing all right without me. I think about this place and how different it is from Ohio. Do you miss it? Ohio? The question caught Clara off guard. Did she miss it? Yes, she missed her family. She missed the familiar places and sounds, but she had chosen to leave. She had wanted something different from her life. I miss my family, she said, but I wanted to come here. I wanted to see what the West was like. I wanted to have my own home. James nodded slowly. It's hard country, he said. Harder than most people expect. But you like it here? It's where I belong, James said simply. They sat quietly after that, but it felt different somehow. Like maybe they had started to understand each other a little bit. Over the next few days, Clara started noticing things she had missed before. The way James always made sure there was firewood cut and stacked by the door before winter came. The way he fixed things around the house without her asking. The way he positioned her chair at the table so she could see out the window while she ate breakfast. James might not talk much, but he was paying attention. He noticed when she struggled with the heavy water buckets and built a pulley system to make it easier. He saw that she liked to read and carved a better lamp for her side of the room. When she mentioned that she missed having flowers around, he didn't say anything. But a few days later, she found him transplanting wildflowers closer to the house. Clara began to realize that maybe James showed care in ways that didn't require words. Maybe he was like his letters after all, just expressed differently in person. She started watching for these small acts of kindness. The way he always checked the windows were latched tight before bad weather. The way he brought her favorite eggs from the hen that laid the biggest ones. The way he never complained when she burned the biscuits or oversalted the stew while she was still learning to cook on his stove. One afternoon, Clara was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she saw James standing on a hill about a quarter-mile away. He was just standing there looking at something she couldn't see. She had noticed him do this before. Always the same hill, always the same thoughtful pose. When he came in for dinner, Clara asked about it. I saw you on the hill today. What do you look at up there? James was quiet for a moment. Good view from up there. Can see the whole ranch, see what needs attention. Clara suspected there was more to it than that, but she didn't push. She was learning that James shared things when he was ready to, not when she asked. That night, lying in bed, Clara thought about her first month as a married woman. It was not what she had expected. James was not the talkative husband she had imagined. Their life together was quiet and simple and sometimes lonely, but maybe that was all right. Maybe she had expected too much too fast. Maybe James was a good man who just showed his goodness quietly. Maybe she needed to learn a new way of being married, one that was based on understanding rather than talking. Outside her window, she could hear the night sounds of the ranch. Cattle lowing softly, wind in the grass, an owl calling from somewhere near the barn. It was peaceful in a way that Ohio had never been. Different, but maybe not bad different. Clara pulled her mother's quilt up to her chin and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring another quiet day with her quiet husband. But maybe she was starting to understand that quiet didn't have to mean empty. Maybe James's silence was full of things she just needed to learn how to hear. It was a Tuesday morning when everything started to change. Clara was making breakfast as usual when she looked out the kitchen window and stopped stirring the eggs. James was outside with a shovel, digging up a patch of ground behind the house. She watched him work, confused. That spot had been covered in grass yesterday. Now James was turning over the soil, making neat rows. He had been out there since before sunrise, working steadily. When James came in for breakfast, Clara couldn't help asking, "What are you doing out back?" "Making you a garden," James said like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Clara blinked. "A garden? You said you missed having space for a proper garden. Like your mother had back in Ohio." Clara tried to remember when she had said that. It had been over a week ago. She had been looking out the window, feeling homesick, and she had mentioned how her mother's garden had always made their house feel more like home. She had said it without thinking, just making conversation. But James had been listening. He had remembered. "You don't have to do that," Clara said. "I know you're busy with the ranch." James was already reaching for his hat. "Ground needs to be ready for spring planting. Better to do it now," and that was that. James went back outside and continued digging. Clara spent the morning watching him work. He was careful and methodical, the same way he did everything else. He measured the rows to make sure they were straight. He removed every rock and weed. When the soil was ready, he built a fence around it to keep the rabbits and deer out. By evening, Clara had a proper vegetable garden. It was bigger than the small patch she had been using near the kitchen door. This was a real garden, the kind where she could grow enough vegetables to last through winter. "Thank you," she said when James came in for dinner. "It's wonderful." James just nodded, but Clara saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. A kind of satisfaction, like he was pleased that he had made her happy. The next Sunday they drove to town for supplies. Clara always enjoyed these trips because it was a chance to see other people. The general store was busy with families getting things they needed for the week. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the store with her husband, always made a point of talking to Clara. "How are you settling in, dear?" "Very well, thank you," Clara said. She was looking at some fabric that had just come in. "This blue is beautiful." "That's good quality cotton," Mrs. Henderson said. "Would make lovely curtains." Clara touched the fabric. It was soft and the color reminded her of the sky on clear days. But it was expensive, and she and James were saving every penny they could. "Maybe next time," Clara said. James was across the store talking to Mr. Henderson about feed for the cattle. Clara didn't think he had heard her conversation about the fabric. They loaded their supplies into the wagon and headed home. Along the way, they passed the Mitchell's ranch. Clara had met Beth Mitchell at church, and they had become friendly. "Look at their porch," Clara said as they drove by. "Isn't it nice?" The Mitchell house had a wide covered porch that wrapped around two sides of the building. There were chairs and a swing where the family could sit in the evenings. Flowers grew in boxes along the railing. "It's very welcoming," Clara added. "Makes the whole house look more inviting." James glanced at the porch but didn't say anything. That evening, Clara was surprised to see James at the kitchen table after dinner. He had paper in front of him and was drawing something with a pencil. "What are you working on?" Clara asked. James covered the paper with his hand. "Just thinking about something." Clara was curious, but she had learned not to push James when he wasn't ready to share. The next morning, James was gone even earlier than usual. Clara could see him outside, but he wasn't doing his regular ranch work. He was measuring the front of the house, walking back and forth with a piece of rope. After breakfast, Clara went outside to check on the chickens. James was at his workbench behind the barn, cutting lumber. "Need help with anything?" Clara asked. "Not yet," James said, "but maybe later." Clara spent the day wondering what James was building. She could hear him hammering and sawing, but every time she looked, he would position himself so she couldn't see exactly what he was doing. By the end of the week, Clara understood. James was building a porch, not just any porch. A porch that wrapped around the front and side of their house, just like the one at the Mitchells. He had even built flower boxes along the railing. "James," Clara said when she realized what he was doing, "this is too much work." "You don't have to do this." James paused in his hammering. "House needs a porch," he said. Should have built one years ago, but Clara knew better. He was building this porch because she had admired the Mitchells' porch. Because she had said it looked welcoming and inviting, Clara started helping however she could. She brought James water when he was working in the hot sun. She held boards steady while he measured and cut. She painted the railings after he built them. Working together on the porch was different from their usual routine. They had to communicate more, coordinate their efforts. James would point to show her where to hold something. Clara would anticipate what tool he needed next. They developed a rhythm, a way of working together that felt natural. One evening, while they were both tired from a day of building, Clara sat on the steps of the half-finished porch. "I keep thinking about something," she said. James sat down beside her. "What's that?" "When I first got here, I thought you didn't like me very much. You were so quiet and I didn't know what to think." James was quiet for a moment. "I liked you fine," he said. "Just didn't know what to say. Been living alone for a long time. Got out of the habit of talking." "But you listen," Clara said. "You hear everything I say, even when I don't think it's important." "Everything you say is important," James said simply. It was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to Clara. A few days later, Clara was in town again with James. This time, when she looked at the blue fabric, James was standing right beside her. "That's the fabric you liked last week," he said. "Yes, but we don't really need curtains right now," Clara said. James was already talking to Mr. Henderson. "How much for enough of that blue fabric to make curtains for our windows?" "James, no," Clara said. "It's too expensive." But James was already paying for the fabric. When Clara protested, he said, "House is going to have a nice porch. Should have nice curtains, too." That night, Clara sat at the kitchen table with the blue fabric spread out in front of her. She was planning how to cut it to make curtains for all their windows. James was working on his latest project, a set of chairs for the new porch. "James," Clara said, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. That hill where you stand sometimes. What do you really see up there?" James stopped sanding the chair he was working on. He looked at Clara for a long time like he was deciding something. "Come on," he said finally. "I'll show you." They walked out to the hill in the fading daylight. It was a steep climb, and Clara was breathing hard by the time they reached the top. But when she turned around, she gasped. The view was incredible. She could see their whole ranch spread out below them. The house with its new porch, the barn, the pastures with cattle grazing peacefully. Beyond that, she could see the mountains rising up purple against the sky. The land rolled away in all directions, vast and beautiful. "This is what you see," Clara said. "It's amazing." "But that's not why I come up here," James said. Clara looked at him, waiting. "I come up here to think about plans," James said. "Things I want to build. Ways to make the ranch better. Ways to make you happier here." He pointed toward their house. "I've been coming up here since before you arrived, thinking about what kind of woman would answer my letters. What she might need. What would make her want to stay." Clara felt her heart do something strange in her chest. "And what did you decide?" "That she would need to feel at home. That she would need to know she was cared for, even if the man she married wasn't good with words." They stood quietly on the hill as the sun set behind the mountains. Clara understood now why James spent so much time up here. It wasn't just the view, though. That was beautiful. It was the perspective. From up here, you could see possibilities. You could plan for the future. "I have an idea," Clara said suddenly. "What's that?" "Instead of you coming up here alone to make plans, what if we came up here together? We could plan things for the ranch, for the house. We could make decisions together." James smiled. It was the first real smile Clara had seen from him since she arrived. "I'd like that," he said. As they walked back down the hill in the growing darkness, Clara felt something shift inside her chest. For weeks, she had been trying to figure out how to live with a husband who didn't talk much. She had been worried that they would never really know each other. But now she understood that James had been showing her who he was all along. Every garden row, every board on the porch, every thoughtful gesture had been his way of speaking. He was a man who expressed love through action, who showed care by building things that would make her life better. Clara had spent her whole life around people who shared their feelings with words. But maybe James's way was just as good, maybe better, because his actions proved what words sometimes couldn't. That night, as Clara worked on cutting fabric for curtains and James finished sanding the porch chairs, the house felt different. Not just. The morning after their trip to the hill, Clara woke to find James at the kitchen table again. But this time he wasn't trying to hide what he was working on. Papers were spread everywhere, covered with drawings and measurements. "What's all this?" Clara asked, pouring herself coffee. "House plans," James said, looking up at her. "Come see." Clara sat down beside him and looked at the drawings. They were detailed sketches of a house. Not their current small cabin, but a real house. A big house with multiple rooms and large windows. "James," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. "What is this?" "Our new house," James said. "Been thinking about it for months. Ever since you got here, I've been realizing how small this place really is." Clara studied the drawings more carefully. There was a large kitchen with windows facing east, so she would have morning light while she cooked. There was a parlor with a fireplace for entertaining guests. There were 2 bedrooms and even a small room that James had labeled library. "You want to build all this?" Clara asked. "We're going to build it," James said. "Together." Clara felt tears in her eyes. "James, this is too much. It would cost so much money and take so much time." "I've been saving money for 8 years," James said. "I've got enough lumber from the trees I cut down last winter." "And time?" he shrugged. "We've got plenty of time." Over the next few days, James showed Clara how serious he was about this plan. He had already picked out the spot where the new house would go, on a small rise about 100 yards from their current cabin. He had been stockpiling materials for months, storing them in the back of the barn where Clara hadn't noticed them. "When did you decide to do this?" Clara asked as they walked around the building site. "The day you arrived," James said. "I saw you looking at our little cabin and I could tell you were trying not to look disappointed. That's when I knew I had to build you something better." Clara felt her chest tighten. She had tried so hard to hide her feelings that first day, but James had seen right through her polite smile. "I wasn't disappointed in you," she said. "Just adjusting to everything being so different." "I know," James said, "but you deserved better than what I was giving you." "Still do." The next Monday, James started clearing the ground for the foundation. Clara brought him water and lunch, but mostly she just watched. James worked with the focused intensity she had come to recognize. When he set his mind to something, he didn't stop until it was done right. By Wednesday, Clara couldn't just stand and watch anymore. "Teach me," she said as James was measuring out where the walls would go. "Teach you what?" "How to help." "How to build a house." James looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. First lesson is measuring. A house is only as good as its measurements." Clara learned to use James's measuring tape, to mark boards for cutting, to check that corners were square. James was patient but thorough. He showed her how to hold a level, how to tell if something was straight, how to read the marks on his square. "Why is it so important that everything is perfect?" Clara asked as they measured the same corner for the 3rd time. "Because if the foundation isn't right, nothing else will be right either," James said. "A house is like a marriage that way. Got to start with a solid foundation or the whole thing will be crooked." Clara looked at him sharply, wondering if he meant more than he was saying. But James was focused on his measuring again. As the days passed, Clara found herself looking forward to working on the house. It was hard physical work, but there was something satisfying about seeing their progress each day. The foundation stones going in place, the floor joists being fitted, the frame of the wall starting to rise. James turned out to be a good teacher. He explained everything he was doing and why. He let Clara try things herself even when she made mistakes. When she cut a board too short, he showed her how to fix it. When she hammered a nail crooked, he taught her how to pull it out and start over. "You're getting good at this," James said one afternoon as Clara successfully cut a board to exactly the right length. "I like it," Clara said, surprising herself. "I never thought I would enjoy building things, but I do." "It's honest work," James said. "You can see what you've accomplished at the end of each day." Working together changed things between them. They had to talk more, coordinate their efforts. Clara would call out measurements while James cut boards. James would ask for her opinion on where to place windows. They developed a rhythm, a way of working that felt natural and efficient. But more than that, they started really talking while they worked. James told her about learning carpentry from his father back in Kansas. Clara shared memories of helping her father fix things around their house in Ohio. They talked about their plans for each room, about what furniture they would need, about how they wanted to arrange everything. "I always wanted a big kitchen," Clara said one day as they framed out the kitchen walls. "My mother's kitchen back home was so small she was always running into people while she cooked." "This one will be big enough for a whole family to work in," James said. Clara looked at him. They had never talked about children. "Are you thinking about a family?" James blushed slightly, something Clara had never seen him do before. "I figured, I hoped, that someday." "I hope so too," Clara said softly. As the house took shape, Clara began to understand how much thought James had put into every detail. The kitchen windows faced east for morning light, but there was also a window on the west side where she could watch the sunset while she did dishes. The parlor was positioned to get the best view of the mountains. Even her little library had windows on two sides so she would have good light for reading at any time of day. "How did you know exactly what I would want?" Clara asked one evening as they sat on their old porch, looking at the new house rising up in the distance. "I listened," James said. "Every time you mentioned something you missed from home, or something you wished you had, I made a note. Then I tried to figure out how to build it into our new house." Clara thought about all the casual comments she had made over the months, about wanting more light in the kitchen, about missing having space to entertain guests, about wishing she had a quiet place to read and write letters. "You remembered everything," she said. "Everything you say is important," James repeated, the same thing he had told her before. As summer turned to fall, the house grew closer to completion. Clara learned to install windows, to hang doors, to smooth rough wood with sandpaper. Her hands, which had been soft when she arrived from Ohio, became strong and calloused. She developed muscles in her arms and back from lifting and carrying. "You've gotten stronger," James observed one day as Clara carried a heavy board without help. "Inside and outside," Clara said. Some evenings, when the work was done, they would walk through their almost finished house and plan how to arrange their furniture. The kitchen needed a big table where they could eat meals and Clara could do her baking. The parlor needed comfortable chairs and a sofa for guests. The library needed shelves for Clara's books and a desk where she could write letters. "It's going to be beautiful," Clara said, running her hand along the smooth wood of what would be her kitchen counter. "It already is beautiful," James said, "because we built it together." One afternoon, while Clara was painting window trim, she heard voices outside. Looking out, she saw Beth Mitchell approaching with two other women from town. "Clara," Beth called. "We came to see your new house." Clara climbed down from her ladder and went to greet them. She was wearing her work clothes and had paint in her hair, but she didn't care. She was proud of what she and James had accomplished. "This is amazing," Beth said, looking around at the nearly finished house. "Did you really help build all of this?" "James taught me," Clara said. "I did all the measuring and a lot of the painting. I even helped install some of the windows." The other women were impressed. Most wives in the area left building work entirely to their husbands. But Clara had learned to use every tool James owned. She could cut boards, drive nails, and read building plans almost as well as he could. "Your husband must be very patient," one of the women said. "He is," Clara agreed, "and he's a good teacher." After the women left, Clara found James finishing the front steps. "Beth Mitchell says people in town are talking about our house," Clara said. "They think it's the finest house in the county." "Don't care what people in town think," James said. "Only care what you think." Clara looked at the house they had built together. It was beautiful, but more than that, it was theirs. Every board, every nail, every window had been placed with care and thought. They had planned it together, built it together, and soon they would live in it together. "I think it's perfect," Clara said. That night, as they sat on their old porch for what might be one of the last times, Clara felt a contentment she had never experienced before. When she had first arrived in Montana, she had been looking for a new life, a new start. She had found that, but she had found something else too. She had found a partner, not just a husband, but someone who truly understood her, someone who listened to her dreams and then helped make them real, someone who had taken her casual wishes and turned them into walls and windows and rooms where they would spend their life together. The new house stood in the gathering darkness, solid and welcoming. Tomorrow they would hang the last door and install. The first snow of winter began falling on the morning they were supposed to move into their new house. Clara stood at the window of their old cabin, watching the white flakes drift down from a gray sky. For a moment she felt worried. Would they be able to finish everything before the weather got worse? But when James came in from his morning chores, he was smiling. "Perfect timing," he said. "Snow means we'll have our first fire in the new fireplace tonight." They had been planning this day for weeks. Everything was ready. The last window had been installed 3 days ago. The floors had been swept clean. Clara had already moved some of their smaller belongings to the new house, arranging books on the library shelves and hanging her mother's quilt in the master bedroom. After breakfast, they began the final move. James hitched up the wagon and they loaded their furniture and remaining possessions. Clara carried her sewing basket and the blue curtains she had finished just the week before. James carried his tools and the clock from their kitchen shelf. The snow was still falling gently as they made trip after trip between the old cabin and the new house. By afternoon, everything was moved. Clara stood in the middle of her new kitchen, surrounded by boxes and furniture that needed to be arranged, and felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. "It's really happening," she said to James. "We're really going to live here." James was building a fire in the kitchen stove. "Been dreaming about this day for months," he said, "ever since we laid the first foundation stone." As the afternoon wore on, Clara began arranging their belongings in their new home. The kitchen table fit perfectly in front of the east window, just as James had planned. Her books looked right at home on the library shelves. The blue curtains she had sewn from the fabric James bought her hung beautifully in every window. But it was more than just the physical arrangement that made the house feel like home. It was the memories built into every corner. Clara remembered helping James install the kitchen cabinets, both of them laughing when they realized they had hung one door upside down. She remembered the afternoon they had spent choosing exactly where to place the parlor windows, standing in the unfinished room and imagining how the light would fall at different times of day. As evening approached, James built fires in both the kitchen stove and the parlor fireplace. The house filled with warmth and the smell of wood smoke. Clara made their first dinner in the new kitchen, simple stew and fresh biscuits. But it felt like the most important meal she had ever cooked. They ate at their kitchen table, looking out at the snow falling in the gathering darkness. The familiar meal tasted different somehow, maybe because they were eating it in a house they had built with their own hands. "Remember our first meal together?" Clara asked. "In the old cabin the night I arrived?" "You barely said 2 words," James said. "I thought you were sorry you had come." "I was scared," Clara admitted. "Everything was so different from what I had expected. You were so quiet and I didn't know what to think." James reached across the table and took her hand. "I was scared too. Scared you would decide I wasn't what you wanted and go back to Ohio." Clara looked around their new kitchen, with its large windows and carefully planned workspace. She thought about the months they had spent building this house together, learning to work as a team, learning to understand each other. "I never want to go back to Ohio," she said. "This is home now." After dinner, they sat in their new parlor by the fireplace. Clara had her sewing in her lap, but she wasn't really working on it. She was too busy looking around the room, still hardly believing they were actually here. The snow was falling heavier now, piling up on the windowsills and covering the ground outside. But inside their house, everything was warm and cozy. The fire crackled in the fireplace. The walls they had built together kept out the cold wind. "James," Clara said, "I want to tell you something." James looked up from the piece of wood he was carving. He was making a small shelf for the kitchen even though they had just moved in. His hands were never idle. "When I first got your letters back in Ohio," Clara continued, "I thought I was looking for a new place to live, a husband, a home, a different kind of life. And now?" James asked. "Now I know I was really looking for a partner, someone who would listen to my dreams and help make them real, someone who would teach me things I never thought I could learn. Someone who would show me that love doesn't always have to be loud to be real." James set down his carving and looked at her seriously. "I never thought I was the kind of man a woman would want to marry. I'm not good with words, I don't have fancy manners, I live in the middle of nowhere. But you built me a garden when I mentioned missing flowers. You built me a porch because I admired someone else's. You built me a whole house because you wanted me to have everything I dreamed of. That's better than fancy words any day." They sat quietly for a while, listening to the fire crackle and the wind blow snow against the windows. Clara felt a peace she had never known before. Not just contentment, but a deep sense of being exactly where she belonged. "I have something for you," James said suddenly. He went to a box in the corner that Clara hadn't unpacked yet and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. "What is it?" Clara asked. James unwrapped a small wooden chest, beautifully carved with flowers and vines. The craftsmanship was incredible, every detail perfect. "I made it for you," James said. "For your letters and important papers. Thought you might like to have something special for your writing things." Clara ran her fingers over the smooth wood, feeling the delicate carving. "James, it's beautiful. When did you have time to make this?" "Been working on it in the evenings after you went to bed. Started it the week after our first trip up the hill together." Clara opened the chest. Inside, the wood was lined with soft fabric, and there were small compartments for pens and ink and paper. It was clearly made by someone who understood how precious a woman's correspondence could be. "I love it," Clara said, and she meant it completely. The chest was beautiful, but more than that, it represented James's thoughtfulness, his attention to what mattered to her. Clara had something for James, too. She had been working on it secretly for weeks. She went to her sewing basket and pulled out a quilt she had been making. It was pieced together from scraps of fabric left over from various projects, but she had arranged the pieces in a pattern that told the story of their first year together. There were pieces from her traveling dress, the one she had worn the day she arrived. Scraps from the fabric James had bought her for the curtains. Bits from old shirts of his that she had mended. Even a piece from the canvas they had used to protect lumber during a rainstorm while they were building. "It's our story," Clara said as she spread the quilt out for James to see. "Every piece of fabric represents something from our time together." James studied the quilt carefully, recognizing the different fabrics and remembering where each piece had come from. "It's perfect," he said finally. "Better than anything you could buy in a store." They spent the rest of the evening talking about their plans for the house, for the ranch, for their life together. James wanted to add on to the barn in the spring. Clara wanted to plant fruit trees near the kitchen garden. They talked about getting more cattle, about maybe raising some pigs, about all the improvements they could make together. When it was time for bed, they walked through their new house, checking that all the fires were banked safely for the night. Clara hung her new quilt on the bed in their master bedroom. James wound the clock and set it on the bedside table. "Hard to believe this morning we woke up in the old cabin," Clara said as she brushed her hair. "Feels like we've been living here for years," James said. Clara looked around the bedroom. It was larger than their old one, with windows on two sides and space for the dresser her father had made back in Ohio. But more than the extra space, it felt right. It felt like their room, in their house, in their life together. That night, Clara lay in bed listening to the sounds of their new house. The wind whistled a little around the corners, but the walls were solid and strong. The roof they had built together kept the snow from reaching them. The fireplace they had laid stone by stone kept them warm, but the best sound was James breathing beside her. Steady and peaceful, the sound of a man who was content with his life, a man who had found someone to share his dreams with, a man who had learned that building a life with another person was the most important construction project he would ever undertake. Clara thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. The stagecoach ride in the storm, the awkward first weeks when she and James barely spoke to each other, the slow process of learning to understand a man who expressed love through actions rather than words, the months of building their house together, learning to work as partners, creating something beautiful with their own hands. Now here she was, in a house they had planned and built together, married to a man who knew her better than anyone ever had, a man who listened to her casual wishes and turned them into reality, a man who had shown her that the strongest foundations weren't just made of stone and timber, but of trust and understanding and shared work. Outside, the snow continued to fall on their land, on their house, on the life they were building together. Inside, Clara felt a warmth that